The caravan was leaving at dawn. Selene had packed everything she owned into a single worn leather bag. 3 changes of clothes, a water flask, a small pouch of coins she'd saved over 2 years, and the silver bracelet her mother had given her before she died. She stood at the edge of the city, watching the merchants load their camels with goods destined for the coastal cities far to the west, places she'd only heard about in stories, places where the sun didn't burn quite so fiercely, places where no one knew her name or her face or the mark that branded her forehead, a divine gift she desperately wanted to give back. But when she tried to step forward to join the caravan, to finally escape, her body simply stopped. Her legs refused to move. Just another girl living in the merchant quarter of Astara, a sprawling desert city built around 3 ancient wells that had never run dry. The wells were the reason Astara existed at all. In a land where water meant life and death, 3 sources of clean, cold water that never ceased flowing were nothing short of miraculous. The city had grown up around them over centuries, expanding in concentric circles, with the wells at its heart and the poorest districts at its edges. Selene's family lived somewhere in the middle, in a neighborhood of modest prosperity, buying rare spices from distant settlements and selling them in Astara's markets for prices that allowed the family to live comfortably. He was gone more often than he was home, but when he returned, he brought not just goods, but stories. Tales of the places he'd been, the people he'd met, the vast and varied world beyond Astara's walls. Those stories had planted seeds in Selene's mind from a very young age. She would sit at her father's feet, listening with wide eyes, as he described the coastal cities where great ships sailed on water that stretched to the horizon. He described forest settlements where trees grew so tall and thick they created perpetual twilight, where moss covered everything in soft green, where the sound of rushing water was constant from streams that never ran dry. Each story made Astara feel smaller, more confining, more like a prison with invisible walls. Where DIDN was restless and always looking toward the horizon, Mara had been rooted, grounded, content with the life she had. She had been a skilled seamstress. She had worked from their home, and Selene remembered the sound of her humming as she sewed, the smell of the oils she used to condition her threads, the feeling of safety that came from watching her mother create beautiful things with patient, practiced hands. Mara had died when Selene was 12. After Mara's death, the family had fractured in subtle ways. DIDN traveled more, staying away for longer periods, as if he couldn't bear to be in the house without his wife. Cale, Selene's older brother, had been 17 when their mother died. He dealt with his grief by throwing himself into work, first as a laborer, then as a guard for one of the wealthy merchant families. Mira was the youngest, only 8 when their mother died. She'd been too young to fully understand what she'd lost. She'd cried at the funeral, but within weeks she was playing again, laughing again, moving forward with the resilience of childhood. She'd been apprenticed to a potter when she turned 10, and she seemed happy enough with that life, shaping clay into useful and beautiful objects, finding her own path in the world. That left Selene in the middle, too young to leave, too old to forget, responsible for maintaining the household when their father was away, for making sure Mira was fed and safe and had clean clothes for her apprenticeship, responsible for running the spice shop in her father's absence, for dealing with suppliers and customers, Selene had felt trapped by those responsibilities, by the expectations that came with being the middle child, the one who kept everything together. She loved her family, but she also resented them just a little, methodically preparing for the day when she would leave. She practiced haggling so she could negotiate a fair price for passage. She learned basic survival skills, how to find water in the desert, how to treat minor injuries, how to tell poisonous plants from edible ones. She did all of this in secret, because she knew what would happen if anyone found out. Her father would be disappointed. Cale would tell her she was being irresponsible. So Selene said nothing and continued to save and plan and dream of the day when she'd have enough money, enough knowledge, enough courage to just leave. She was close, so close. Who had a reputation for fairness, and who wouldn't ask too many questions as long as the payment was good. The next major caravan was scheduled to leave in 3 months, and Selene had been counting down the days like a prisoner marking time until freedom. And then the day of offering had come and changed everything. It was a major religious event, drawing people from all over the city, and even from some of the smaller settlements that surrounded it. Its walls were covered in intricate mosaics made from thousands of tiny tiles in every shade of gold, bronze, and copper, depicting scenes from the sacred histories. The first humans arriving in the desert, with the sacred well at its center, surrounded by a low wall of white stone. Selene had attended the day of offering ceremonies several times as a child, back when her mother was alive and the family did such things together. She remembered finding them beautiful, but interminably long. Those who were chosen bore the mark proudly, for the rest of their lives, serving as solar hands, healers, advisors, mediators, teachers. It was an honor, everyone said, a divine gift, a blessing beyond measure. Selene had always thought it looked like a burden. The marked ones she'd met always seemed weighted down by duty, by the expectations of everyone around them, by the constant need to be worthy of the blessing they'd received. They couldn't just be people. They had to be examples, symbols, vessels of divine will. Mira was 16 now, and she'd become increasingly interested in religious matters over the past year. She attended services regularly, prayed at the local shrine, talked enthusiastically about the sacred stories and the wisdom of the feline totems. Everyone goes to watch. It's the biggest event of the year. We can make a day of it. Get honey cakes from that vendor you like. Maybe look at the fabric stalls afterward. Please. Selene had looked at her younger sister, no longer quite so young, really, but still with that hopeful, their father's presence for all practical purposes. Years of her childhood spent largely in the care of a sister who was always distant, always planning to leave. The least Selene could do was spend one day with her. "All right," Selene had said, "one day. But we're not staying for the whole thing. Just the actual marking ceremony, then we leave." Mira had lit up like the sun itself. "Thank you. I promise it'll be fun." "Well, not fun exactly, but interesting, meaningful. You'll see." So they went together to the Temple of the Three Wells on the day of the spring equinox. Vendors moved through the crowd, selling dates and nuts and sweet pastries. Children darted between adults, playing tag. Musicians sat near the temple walls, playing soft background melodies on flutes and drums. Everyone was dressed in their best clothes. Not necessarily expensive. Most were young, in their late teens or early 20s. They wore identical white robes provided by the temple and walked with heads bowed in appropriate reverence. Their families stood near the front of the crowd, easy to identify by their proud expressions and their occasional waves to their candidates. And the tall one is Jessamine. She's studying to be a scribe. They've been preparing for months. Special meditations and prayers and studying the sacred texts. I hope at least one of them is chosen. Selene nodded absently, her attention already wandering. How much longer would this take? An hour? 2? She had things to do, coins to count, plans to refine. This was time she could have spent being productive. But she'd promised Myra, so she settled in and tried to be patient. The ceremony began with prayers. High Priestess Thesa emerged from the temple's inner sanctum, accompanied by 12 junior priests. Thesa was a severe-looking woman in her 50s, given to her when she was 17 and serving as her badge of authority for over 3 decades now. Thesa raised her hands, and the crowd fell into respectful silence. Her voice, when she spoke, carried clearly across the courtyard, amplified by both the excellent acoustics and the magical properties of her mark. Children of the sun, we gather on this sacred day to witness the choosing. The sun gives its light to all, but to some it gives more, the blessing of bearing its mark, the honor of serving as vessels of divine power, the responsibility of being bridges between the light above and the people below. She noticed many people in the crowd nodding along, and a few even had tears in their eyes. Selene just wanted it to be over. Finally, the actual marking began. The candidates approached the raised platform one by one, climbing the steps and kneeling before High Priestess Thesa. Ancient syllables in a language most people no longer fully understood, and wait. For most candidates, nothing happened. The unchosen candidates would rise, trying to hide their disappointment behind masks of dignified acceptance, and return to their families. Some handled it well. Others were clearly fighting back tears. One young man looked angry, his jaw clenched as he descended the platform steps, but some were marked. The first was a young woman, perhaps 19, from one of the merchant families. When Thesa spoke the invocation, there was a moment of stillness, and then light bloomed on the girl's forehead. It started as a small point and expanded into the classic pattern, a circle with 8 rays, each ray perfectly symmetrical, glowing with steady illumination. The light persisted for perhaps 10 seconds, bright enough to see clearly even in the brilliant desert sunlight, and then it faded, not disappearing entirely, but sinking into the skin. The crowd murmured in approval. The girl's family burst into loud celebration. The girl herself looked stunned, touching her forehead gently, as if unable to believe what had happened. "Rise, Solar Hand," Thesa said formally. "You have been chosen. May you serve with wisdom and humility." The newly marked girl descended the platform, walking now to a separate area where the chosen candidates would wait together. More candidates approached. Most were passed over. A few more were blessed, a total of 4 in the first 30 candidates. It was actually a higher rate of choosing than usual. Selene heard people around her whispering. The sun was being generous this equinox. Mira's friends were among the last group of candidates. Selene watched as they approached one by one. Tana, the potter's apprentice, knelt, received the blessing. "She's so dedicated. She'll make an excellent solar hand." Calculating how long it would take to reach the honey cake vendor Mira liked, wondering if they could get the treats and be home within an hour. And then something went wrong. It would have been almost unthinkable if he wasn't. Darian knelt before High Priestess Thesa with visible confidence. He didn't bow his head as deeply as the others had. He held himself with the assurance of someone who knew his worth, who expected to be blessed, who was already imagining his future as a powerful solar hand. Thesa placed her hand above his head and spoke the invocation. For a moment everything seemed normal. The words echoed across the courtyard, as they had 36 times already. Darian knelt still and straight. And then he screamed. The junior priests rushed forward. People in the crowd screamed or shouted or gasped. Some pushed forward to see better. Others tried to move away, suddenly fearful. Darian collapsed completely, falling forward onto the platform, still convulsing. One of the priests knelt beside him, checking his pulse, tilting his head to keep his airway clear. Thesa was speaking urgently to her other priests. Her carefully maintained composure shattered. No one knew what had happened. There was no pain involved, no violence, no. The beam of light came from the sky. People screamed, scattered, pointed, fell to their knees in prayer or terror. Parents grabbed their children. Guards stationed around the courtyard drew their weapons uselessly, having no idea what they were supposed to defend against. The beam of light moved through the crowd. Selene saw it coming toward her and felt her heart stop. She tried to move, tried to push through the crowd and get away, tried to run as she'd been planning to run for years. But there were too many people, too much confusion, bodies packed together with nowhere to go. The light found her. It filled her lungs until she couldn't breathe, trying to breathe but couldn't find air. Tried to exist but felt herself dissolving, breaking apart into particles of light that scattered across the courtyard. And then something inside her shifted. She felt it like a physical sensation, something deep in her core that had been closed, suddenly opening, like a door she hadn't known existed swinging wide. Power rushed in, not just from the light, but from something else, something that had been waiting inside her all along. The two forces met and merged, the external light and the internal darkness finding equilibrium, and in that moment of perfect balance the mark formed. The pain stopped, the light vanished. Selene was on her hands and knees on the ground, gasping for air, her whole body shaking. Bang! She could hear voices around her, but couldn't make out words. Her ears were ringing. Every nerve in her body felt raw, oversensitized, as if she'd been flayed and then healed wrong. Selene tried to answer, but only managed a weak cough. She touched her forehead, expecting to find it burned, blistered, damaged by whatever had just happened. Instead, she felt heat, intense heat radiating from her skin, but not painfully, not like a burn, like the warmth of strong sunlight on a summer day, concentrated into a small area. And she felt something else, a texture, a pattern carved or burned or somehow etched into her flesh. The mark. She looked around and realized that the entire courtyard had fallen silent. Thousands of people were staring at her. The candidates on the platform had stopped moving. Even the priests were motionless, their expressions ranging from shock to awe to what might have been fear. High Priestess Thesa was pushing through the crowd, staring at her forehead with an expression Selene had never seen on her severe face before, wonder. "What is the meaning of this?" Thesa said, but her voice was soft, almost reverent, completely unlike her usual authoritative tone. You weren't even a candidate. People kept saying it. Selene was starting to hate it. Thesa didn't answer. She just continued staring, and now other priests were arriving. What happened to me? Scholar Petrich looked at her with eyes that seemed to see right through her. The mark of the Wind Cheetah, the blessing of speed and freedom, and the refusal to be bound. Unstoppable, the scholar finished quietly. The word hung in the air like a pronouncement of fate. Unstoppable. Selene felt laughter bubbling up in her chest, hysterical and inappropriate. Unstoppable. That was rich. She'd just been stopped from leaving, stopped from pursuing her dreams, stopped from having any say in her own future. She'd been branded by divine light without her permission, marked for a life of service she'd never wanted. The weeks that followed were a waking nightmare. They arrived in the early morning, while the family was still eating breakfast, or trying to. None of them had slept well. Mira kept staring at Selene with a mixture of awe and concern. Their father was still away on his trading journey, unreachable, unaware that his middle daughter had been marked by a totem that hadn't chosen anyone in 5 centuries. The temple representatives were led by a priest named Orion. He came bearing scrolls and documents, speaking in soothing tones about honor and duty and divine calling. You carry a power that hasn't manifested in over 500 years. Selene sat across from him, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. I don't want to be special. Most people who are marked have spent years preparing for the possibility. They've studied the sacred texts, practiced meditation, cultivated their spiritual awareness. You had no warning, no preparation. It's natural to feel shock, even resistance. I feel trapped. That's just your initial reaction. Once you understand what you've been given, once you begin your training and see what you're capable of, you'll feel differently. I promise you that. You can't promise me how I'll feel. Orion set down his teacup carefully. Selene, let me be clear about something. The mark cannot be removed. There is no ritual, no prayer, no technique that can undo what the sun has done. The divine blessing is permanent. You will carry it for the rest of your life. Then I'll leave, Selene said. I'll go somewhere far away where no one knows about the mark, where I can just live my life. The mark will glow whenever you use its power. Orion interrupted gently, and you will use its power. You'll bless wells and crops. You'll find yourself doing the work of a solar hand no matter where you go or how much you resist. Selene felt something cold settle in her stomach. That's not possible. I can control my own actions. Can you control your heartbeat? Can you control your breathing when you sleep? Some things operate beyond conscious will. Orion leaned forward slightly. The mark is tied to your soul now, Selene. It responds to the fundamental nature of who you are. And who you are, whether you want to admit it or not, is someone who cannot ignore suffering. The totems don't make mistakes. They talked for another hour, or rather Orion talked, explaining the training program the temple offered, the resources available to her, the community of other solar hands who could mentor and support her. She was too busy planning her escape, but Orion's words kept echoing in her mind over the following days. The mark will activate whether you want it to or not. She soon discovered he was right. The first time it happened was 3 days after the marking. An old woman had collapsed between two stalls, but the mark on her forehead grew suddenly, intensely hot. It felt like someone had pressed a burning coal against her skin, not quite painful but insistent, impossible to ignore. The heat spread down her neck, into her chest, making her heart race. She pushed through the small crowd and knelt beside the old woman. Her hand reached out, placing itself on the woman's chest, directly over her heart. The mark blazed. Golden light poured from Selene's palm, flowing into the woman's body. The light dissolved it, broke it apart into harmless particles that the body could process and eliminate. The woman gasped, her color returning, her breathing easing. The whole thing took perhaps 30 seconds. "You collapsed," someone said, "but the Sun Warden healed you." "Thank you. Thank you. I thought I was dying. You saved my life." Selene backed away, shaking her head. "IDN single quotes T. But people were staring at her now, recognizing the mark on her forehead, realizing what had happened. Some bowed their heads in respect. Selene turned and ran, leaving her basket of supplies behind, fleeing through the market streets until she reached the relative safety of her home. She locked herself in her room and stared at her hands, which still tingled with residual energy from the healing. She hadn't wanted to help that woman, but the mark had overridden her will, used her body as a channel for something she didn't understand and couldn't control. This is what Orion had meant. This is what she couldn't escape. It kept happening. Selene tried to keep walking, tried to ignore it, but the burning intensified until she could think of nothing else. Finally, with a mixture of frustration and resignation, she approached the well. She placed her hand on the stone rim, and golden light flowed from her palm into the water. When she pulled her hand away, a small crowd had gathered, watching with wide eyes. "The Sun Warden blessed our well," someone whispered. "The water's clean again. Look how clear it is. Thank you, Blessed One. Thank you. And thank you." Selene left quickly, before they could mob her with gratitude she didn't want. A week after the marking, a child fell from a roof while playing. His arm bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. He screamed in pain. His mother screamed, too, cradling him, looking around desperately for help. Selene was 3 streets away when the mark grew hot. She tried to resist, tried to keep walking in the opposite direction, but the burning became agony. Her legs refused to move forward, and after a minute of standing frozen in place, she finally gave in and ran toward the screaming. The child was in shock, his face pale, his broken arm cradled against his chest. "This might feel strange, but it won't hurt, I promise." She placed her hands gently around the broken arm. The mark flared and light poured into the child's body. Selene felt the fracture, a clean break, mercifully, not complicated. She guided the light to stimulate the bone cells, to accelerate the natural healing process that would normally take weeks. Bone knitted back together, torn blood vessels sealed. The child moved it cautiously, then with increasing confidence, his expression changing from pain to wonder. His mother grabbed Selene's hands, sobbing. "How can I thank you? What do you want?" She left before the crowd could surround her, before the questions and praise could begin. But that night, lying in her bed and staring at the ceiling, Selene couldn't stop thinking about the child's face. The way his pain had transformed to relief. The way his mother's desperate fear had given way to joy. She'd helped them, really genuinely helped them. The child would have been in pain for weeks without her intervention, and that made all the difference. Over the following weeks, Selene tried everything she could think of to suppress the mark's power. The mark seemed to have its own awareness, its own will. It knew when someone nearby needed help, even if Selene couldn't see them, and it wouldn't let her ignore that need. The only way to stop the burning was to help, every single time. Word spread quickly through Astara, the girl marked by the Wind Cheetah, the reluctant sun warden who healed despite herself. People began seeking her out, coming to her home with their problems, their illnesses, their broken things. Selene tried to refuse them. She told them she wasn't accepting patients, wasn't providing services, wasn't a healer they could rely on. She tried to have meals with her family, but someone would knock on the door mid-meal with an emergency. She tried to sleep, but would wake in the night with the mark burning, pulling her toward someone in distress 3 streets over. Her family didn't understand. Cale thought she was being ungrateful, throwing away an incredible opportunity because of some childish desire for independence. He demanded one evening after she'd come home exhausted from a day of non-stop healing. "Do you understand what a blessing this is? How much good you could do?" "I don't want to do good," Selene snapped back. "I want to live my own life." "That's selfish." "It's honest." Mira was quieter in her disapproval, but Selene could feel it. Her younger sister had always been more religious, more willing to accept the structures and expectations of their society. She looked at Selene with hurt in her eyes, as if Selene's rejection of the blessing was a personal betrayal. "But what kind of life is it if you're only thinking about yourself?" The words stung more than they should have, probably because part of Selene wondered if her sister was right. Was she being selfish? Was her desire for freedom really more important than the lives she could save, the suffering she could prevent? But then she'd remember the feeling of her legs refusing to move when she tried to leave Astara. The feeling of being controlled, manipulated, used as a tool for purposes she'd never agreed to. And she'd think, no, this isn't service. This is slavery with a prettier name. Her father returned from his trading journey 6 weeks after the marking. Darian came home to find his middle daughter famous, sought after, and absolutely miserable. They had the conversation Selene had been dreading in the quiet of late evening, sitting together in the shop after it had closed for the day. "They told me what happened," her father said, studying her face, his eyes lingering on the mark that glowed softly on her forehead. "That you were marked by the Wind Cheetah, that the whole city is talking about you." "I didn't want it," Selene said immediately, needing him to understand. "This isn't what I wanted for my life." Her father was quiet for a long moment. "I know," he finally said. She felt heat rising to her face, shame mixing with defensiveness. "If you knew, why didn't you stop me?" "Because I understood." Darian leaned back, his expression distant, remembering. "When I was your age, I wanted to leave too. I felt suffocated here, trapped by expectations and traditions. That's why I became a trader, so I could travel, see the world, feel free, even if it was only for a few months at a time before I had to return." "Then you understand why I can't accept this," Selene said urgently. "I thought if I could just keep moving, keep traveling, I'd find whatever I was looking for. But you know what I found instead?" "What?" "That I was still myself wherever I went, still carrying the same doubts, the same restlessness, the same feeling that something was missing. Geography doesn't solve internal problems. I'm running from being forced into a role I never chose, being used by some divine power that doesn't care what I want. Maybe, her father conceded. Or maybe you're running from the possibility that you might actually be good at something you didn't plan for, that you might find meaning in a path you didn't choose. Then let me ask you this. Her father met her eyes steadily. Have you ever felt free? Even before the marking, when you were planning your escape, hoarding your coins, plotting your routes, did that feel like freedom? Or did it feel like a different kind of prison, one you built for yourself? 3 months after receiving the mark, Selene made her first serious attempt to leave Astara. She'd been planning it carefully, waiting for the right moment. Her father was away on another trading journey. Cale was working extended shift to cover for a sick colleague. Selene had managed to convince the caravan master's assistant to add her name to the roster, paying double the normal rate for his discretion. All she had to do was reach the gathering point before dawn, blend in with the other travelers, and disappear. Water flask, coins, her mother's bracelet. She didn't leave a note. Explanations would only give them ammunition to come after her, to try to convince her to stay. Better to just go. She slipped out of her house in the darkness before dawn, moving quietly through the still sleeping streets of Astara. The city was peaceful at this hour, almost beautiful. The buildings gleamed faintly in the light of the waning moon. The air was cool, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers from someone's garden. A few cats prowled the alleys, hunting for mice. A baker was already at work somewhere nearby, the smell of baking bread drifting on the breeze. This was the moment she'd been working toward for years. She reached the city gates just as the first hint of gray appeared on the eastern horizon. The gates were open, as they always were at this hour, to allow farmers and traders to come and go. 2 guards were stationed there, but they barely glanced at her as she passed through. Just another early riser going about their business. Beyond the gates, the desert stretched out, vast and dark and full of promise. The caravan gathering point was about half a mile outside the city, where there was enough space for the animals and wagons to assemble without clogging the roads. She took a step forward, toward freedom, toward the life she'd always wanted. Her leg stopped moving. Not injured, simply ... Stopped, as if she'd hit an invisible wall, as if her body had suddenly decided it no longer took commands from her mind. Selene tried again. She willed her leg to move, commanded it with every ounce of determination she possessed. Nothing. The mark on her forehead grew hot. Not the insistent warmth that signaled someone needed healing. This was different. This was the heat of denial, of prohibition. This was the mark saying, no. And then she heard the voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from inside her head and outside in the desert air. It was wind made sound, movement made language, speed made speech. The Wind Cheetah. You are needed here. Her voice was raw with desperation. I don't want to be needed. I want to leave. You marked me without my permission. You've been using me without my consent. The least you can do is let me go. Not yet. When? Selene demanded, and she was crying now, hot tears of frustration streaming down her face. When will I be allowed to leave? The presence shifted, became almost thoughtful. You are learning a lesson. When the lesson is complete, I will release you, but not before. What lesson? Selene's voice cracked. Give me something. Tell me what you want from me. The voice was quiet for a long moment. It is avoidance. True freedom comes when you stop running from yourself. I'm not running from myself. I'm running from you. But what would happen next time she tried to help someone? What would happen when the mark activated, when people realized what she was? She'd be right back where she started, trapped, used, bound by a destiny she'd never chosen. Selene stood there for a long time, watching the sky grow lighter, watching the caravan finish its preparations. She watched them depart, a long line of travelers and animals moving west toward the horizon, toward the ocean, toward everything she'd ever wanted. And then she turned around and walked back into Astara, defeated. She tried 3 more times over the next 2 months. The 4th time she broke down completely. She was alone in her room, surrounded by her packed belongings, staring at the mark in a bronze mirror. The mark stared back at her, glowing steadily, implacable. It had become the center of her existence, this thing she hadn't asked for and couldn't remove. It controlled when she healed. It controlled where she went. It controlled in every way that mattered her life. Why? She whispered to her reflection, to the mark, to whatever divine force listened. Why me? Why won't you let me go? I never asked for this. I never wanted to serve you. I just want to live my own life. Why can't you understand that? The mark pulsed once, warmly, almost gently. And for the first time, the voice that spoke through it carried something that sounded like real emotion. Not because I deny you permission, but because if you left now, you would carry bitterness and resentment with you every step of the way. You would spend your life wondering what you could have become if only you had been free. That is just fear with traveling shoes. Selene felt something break inside her. Not her spirit, not her will, but some wall she'd been maintaining between herself and reality. Tears came, not the angry tears of frustration, but deeper tears of grief, of mourning for the life she'd planned and would never have. She cried for a long time that night. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of profound loss. She mourned the girl she'd been before the marking, when she'd still believed she could control her own destiny. When the tears finally stopped, she felt empty, hollow, but also somehow lighter, as if crying out the grief had created space for something else. She didn't know what that something else was yet. But for the first time since the marking, she was willing to find out. And then came the night when everything changed. It was late, well past midnight, and she'd spent hours moving from house to house, channeling the mark's power into sick children and desperate parents. She was drained physically and emotionally, barely conscious when her head hit the pillow. The dream came immediately. The sand flew beneath her feet, barely touched before she was past it. The wind screamed in her ears, and she felt powerful, alive, free in a way she hadn't felt since before the marking. She looked down and realized she wasn't human anymore. She was running on 4 legs, not 2. Her body was sleek and muscular, covered in golden fur marked with black spots. Her senses were impossibly sharp. She could hear the heartbeat of a mouse hiding beneath the sand 100 feet away, or rather she was experiencing the world as the Wind Cheetah experienced it. It was intoxicating, glorious, everything Selene had ever wanted. And then the cheetah stopped running. She stood on a dune overlooking the desert, her tail swishing slowly, her golden eyes fixed on something in the distance. When she spoke, her voice was wind made sound, movement made language. Do you understand now? Understand what? In this dream state, she wasn't sure if she had a voice, or if her thoughts simply existed in the space between them. Why you cannot leave. Why I will not release you. Not yet. No, Selene said bitterly. I don't understand any of it. You've trapped me. You've taken my life and forced me into a role I never wanted. I have given you exactly what you asked for. Selene recoiled. You asked for freedom. The cheetah turned to look at her, and Selene realized she could see herself in this dream, a small, translucent figure standing beside the massive feline form. Every day of your life you asked for freedom. You planned for it. You dreamed of it. You saved your coins and plotted your escape. You wanted to run, to move, to never be held in one place. Yes, and you took that from me. No. The cheetah's voice was infinitely patient. I showed you that what you thought was freedom was actually another cage. A prettier cage, perhaps. A cage of your own design, but a cage nonetheless. I don't understand. The cheetah turned back to the desert vista. You wanted to run away from Astara. Why? Because I felt trapped there. Because everyone had expectations of who I should be and what I should do. Because I wanted to make my own choices. And if you had left, the cheetah said, where would you have gone? What would you have done? I would have traveled, seen the world, been free. Free to do what? Be what? Traveling is not freedom, child. It is simply motion. You would have moved from place to place, but you would have carried your cage with you, the cage of not knowing who you are. The cage of running from connection instead of toward purpose. And truth is often uncomfortable. The cheetah sat, curling her tail around her paws. True freedom is not the absence of obligation. It is the presence of choice made with full understanding. It is acting not because you must, not because you are trapped. It reminds. But ultimately, every choice is still yours. Then why can't I leave? Because you are not ready. The cheetah's voice softened. Not because you lack permission. Because you lack understanding. You would be running from something instead of toward something. And that is not freedom. That is just fear with traveling shoes. So what do I do? How do I become ready? You stop fighting what is and start seeing what could be. Look at what you have accomplished in 6 months. You have healed hundreds. You have brought water to dry wells. You have saved lives that would have been lost. And you have done it while hating every moment, because I didn't choose it. But you did. Every time someone came to your door and you answered. Those were choices, Selene, your choices. No one forced your hand to heal that old woman in the market. No one made you spend hours with plague victims. You did that, not because you were trapped. It makes you someone who has the seed of true service within her, buried under layers of resentment and fear. The cheetah stopped and looked at Selene directly. I did not mark you to punish you. I marked you because I saw that seed. Then you will be miserable for as long as you cling to that resentment. But the choice to release it is yours. I cannot make it for you. I can only show you the path and trust that eventually you will be ready to walk it freely. The cheetah began to fade. becoming transparent, as insubstantial as morning mist. 6 months ago, you ran from the temple in panic and rage. You have spent every day since wishing you could run farther. But running is only freedom if you know where you're going. Otherwise, it's just exhaustion with scenery. Wait, Selene called. If I do this, if I stop fighting and start accepting, will you let me leave then? Will I be free to go? The cheetah was almost gone now, barely visible. When you are truly ready to leave, her voice whispered, you will find you no longer want to. The next morning, Selene woke with the dream still vivid in her mind, and she could feel a lingering presence, as if the cheetah had left something of herself behind. I showed you that what you thought was freedom was actually another cage. Was that true? Had her careful plans and desperate escapes just been another kind of prison? What kind of freedom was that? There was a knock at her door. She'd been walking on eggshells around Selene for months, ever since the marking. The easy relationship they'd once had was gone, replaced by awkwardness and unspoken tension. Selene's first instinct was to refuse, keeping as much distance as possible from the institution that seemed to think it owned her. But something made her pause. Maybe it was the dream. Maybe it was exhaustion. Myra nodded and disappeared. Selene dressed quickly and went downstairs. The woman waiting in their modest receiving room was not what Selene expected. She was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes, and a solar mark on her forehead that glowed with soft, steady light. She wore simple robes, not the elaborate ceremonial garments that High Priestess Thesa favored. When she saw Selene, she smiled. "Selene," she said, bowing slightly, "thank you for seeing me. I'm a cellar hand who works primarily outside the temple structure." "I'm not interested in joining the temple," Selene said immediately. "I'm not here to recruit you." Lyra gestured to the cushions. "May I sit? I'd like to talk to you about your mark. The girl marked by the Wind Cheetah, who doesn't want to serve. The Sunwarden who fights her calling. The blessed one who considers her mark a curse." "Word travels," Selene said dryly. "It does." Lyra's smile was sympathetic. "And I understand more than you might think." "Really? You understand what it's like to have your life stolen from you?" "Yes," Lyra said simply, "because that's exactly what happened to me." Selene blinked. "What?" "I received my mark when I was 17, Lyra said. I was apprenticed to a merchant ship captain. I was learning navigation, trade routes, languages. Now, yes, but not for the first 2 years. Lyra's expression grew distant, remembering. "For 2 years I fought it just like you're fighting it. I refused to use the mark's power." Lyra leaned forward slightly. "He was dying, and someone brought me to him thinking I might help. I refused at first. He said, 'The mark is not a chain, it's a compass. It doesn't trap you. It points you toward who you're meant to become.' Many do. They live their lives resenting their blessings, feeling trapped, wishing they were someone else. Or you can choose to see what the compass is pointing toward and decide for yourself if that direction is worth exploring. The mark won't let you leave while running away," Lyra corrected gently. "There's a difference. When I chose to serve willingly instead of being dragged into it, kicking and screaming, the mark released its hold. I could leave whenever I wanted. How do I know that would happen for me? How do I know this isn't just manipulation?" "You don't," Lyra admitted. "You have to trust. And I know that's hard when trust has been broken by an experience you didn't choose. And once that transformation is complete, once you understand what you're capable of and why that matters, the freedom you thought you lost comes back. Different than you imagined, but deeper and more real. They sat in silence for a moment, that others have walked this path before you, and that there is another side to this, if you're willing to seek it. She stood, preparing to leave. I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that fighting against the current is keeping you trapped in place. Lyra moved toward the door, then paused. If you ever want to talk, to learn more about what being a solar hand can mean outside the temple structures, send word to the Silver Lotus Inn. I'm staying there for another week. She left, and Selene sat alone in the receiving room, turning Lyra's words over in her mind. The mark is not a chain, it's a compass. Fighting against the current is keeping you trapped in place. When you are truly ready to leave, you will find you no longer want to. For the next 3 days, Selene thought about everything that Cheetah and Lyra had said. But now she observed herself as she did these things. The satisfaction when a sick child's fever broke under her touch. The relief on a mother's face when she realized her baby would live. The gratitude in an old man's eyes when she eased his pain. The way people looked at her, not with fear or judgment, but with hope. Selene had been so busy fighting against being trapped that she hadn't noticed what she was actually doing with her days. She'd been healing people, helping people, making genuine, measurable differences in lives that would have been much harder without her intervention. It wasn't the adventure she'd dreamed of. She went to the Silver Lotus Inn and asked for Lyra. They sat together in the inn's garden, a small oasis of green in the desert city, and Selene said, "Teach me." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Teach you what? How to stop fighting. How to serve willingly instead of resentfully. How to—" Selene paused, searching for the right words. "How to find the freedom you talked about, the deeper kind." Lyra smiled. "That's not something I can teach directly, but I can show you how to work with your mark instead of against it. I can introduce you to other solar hands who found their own paths, and I can share what I've learned about making peace with a destiny you didn't choose but might discover you needed." "That's cryptic." "It's honest," Lyra said, echoing the cheetah's words from the dream. "And honestly, Selene, the fact that you're here asking for help instead of plotting another escape attempt tells me you're already further along this path than you realize." They began that afternoon. She introduced her to other solar hands, some who worked within the temple structures, others who served independently, all of them people who had found ways to make their callings their own. Most importantly, Lyra taught Selene to listen, not to the voice of the cheetah, though that was part of it, but to listen to the people she helped, to really hear their stories, their struggles, their hopes, to see them not as interruptions or obligations, but as individuals whose lives intersected with hers for a reason. It was hard work, harder than Selene had expected. Changing the habits of thought and feeling that she'd built up over 6 months of resistance didn't happen overnight. There were days when she still felt trapped, still resented the mark, still dreamed of walking away from all of it. But slowly, gradually, something shifted. She started to notice that she felt more energized after healing someone than she did after a day of wallowing in resentment. She discovered that she was good at this work, not just technically competent, but genuinely skilled at understanding what people needed and providing it. She found herself looking forward to certain regular visits, like the weekly trip to the orphanage where she checked on the children's health and told them stories about the feline totems. Not because she'd forgotten her old dreams, not because the mark had somehow brainwashed her into compliance, but because she was, for the first time in her life, fully present where she was. She was doing work that mattered. She was developing real relationships with the people she served. She was becoming someone she hadn't known she could be, someone who served not out of obligation, but out of choice. The mark on her forehead still glowed, still warmed when someone needed help. But now, instead of feeling like a prison, it felt like ... a companion, a partner, a constant reminder that she was capable of making a difference. 9 months after receiving the mark, Selene stood once again at the edge of Astara, watching a caravan prepare for departure. But this time she wasn't there to join it. She was there to see it off. One of the merchants in the caravan had been suffering from a chronic illness that the temple healers hadn't been able to treat. Selene had worked with him for weeks, finally identifying the problem and channeling the mark's energy in a very specific way that allowed his body to heal itself. He was grateful and healthy now, ready to make the journey he'd thought he'd never survive. He clasped Selene's hands in his. "Thank you, Sunwarden. You gave me my life back." "Safe travels," Selene said, smiling genuinely. "And drink plenty of water. The western routes are dry this time of year." She watched the caravan begin to move, the camels plodding steadily, the merchants calling out to each other, the whole enterprise setting off toward horizons she'd once desperately wanted to reach. And she felt ... content. Not sad, not envious, just content to be where she was, doing what she was doing. A familiar presence brushed against her mind, warm as sunlight, quick as wind. "The cheetah. Do you understand now?" the voice asked, gentle and amused. "Yes," Selene said aloud, not caring if anyone heard. "I think I do. Tell me." "Freedom isn't about going wherever you want. It's about wanting to be where you are." "Close," the cheetah said. "Freedom is about choosing where you are with full knowledge of what that choice means. You could leave now if you wanted. The mark would not stop you. But you choose to stay because you have discovered something worth staying for." Selene touched the mark on her forehead. It pulsed warmly under her fingers. No longer a brand or a curse, just a part of her. "Will I always stay here?" she asked. "In Astara? That is for you to decide. There are other cities that need what you offer. Other people who could benefit from your gifts. When you are ready to see more of the world, you will go. Not running from something, but walking toward something. And you will be free in a way you never were when all you wanted was to escape." "Thank you," Selene whispered, "for not giving up on me. Even when I wanted to give up on this." "I never give up on those I mark," the cheetah said. "I simply wait for them to stop giving up on themselves." The presence faded, but not the warmth. That stayed with Selene as she turned away from the departing caravan and walked back into the city, back toward the people who needed her, back toward the life she had chosen. 2 years after receiving the mark, Selene did leave Astara, but not in secret, not in desperation, not running away. She left openly, with the blessings of the community she'd served, heading to a distant city that had sent word requesting a solar hand's help with a plague outbreak. She traveled with a caravan, just as she'd always dreamed. She saw the coastal cities and the mountain kingdoms. She walked through forests and crossed rivers and stood at the edge of an ocean that seemed to go on forever. It was everything she'd wanted, and it was nothing like she'd expected, because everywhere she went, she brought her mark and her purpose. She healed and taught and served. She made connections with people in every place she visited. She became known as the Sun Warden of the Wind, marked by the cheetah, who traveled freely but served deeply wherever she went. She was doing exactly what she dreamed of, traveling, seeing the world, living freely. But she was doing it for a reason beyond just her own desire to move. She was doing it because it mattered, because she had gifts worth sharing, because she had discovered that true freedom wasn't the absence of responsibility, but the presence of purpose. And when people asked her about her mark, about how she became a Sun Warden, about why she chose this life, she would smile and tell them the truth. I didn't choose it at first. I fought it for months. I thought the mark was a chain, but I learned it was a compass, pointing me toward who I needed to become. And when I finally stopped running from it and started running toward it, I found the freedom I'd been searching for all along. Sometimes they understood. Sometimes they didn't. But Selene understood, and that was enough. Years later, in a small desert settlement far from Astara, a young woman received a mark during a ceremony she hadn't wanted to attend. She ran from the temple in panic and fear, feeling trapped and desperate and certain her life was over. Selene found her 3 days later, hiding in an abandoned building on the edge of town, trying unsuccessfully to scrub the mark off her forehead. "It won't come off," Selene said gently from the doorway. The girl jumped, turning to face her. Her eyes were red from crying. "You're a Sun Warden." "I am. Did you want this, the mark?" Selene smiled, remembering a conversation years ago with a kind woman named Lyra. "No, I didn't want it at all. I fought it for a long time, so you understand." The girl's voice was desperate, pleading. "You understand what it's like." "I do." Selene moved closer, sitting down on the dusty floor near the girl. "I understand the feeling that your life has been stolen, that you've been trapped, that nothing will ever be the same and you didn't even get a choice in the matter." "Yes, exactly." The girl started crying again. "I had plans. I was supposed to. I wanted to double quotes, be free," Selene finished softly. "You wanted to be free." "Yes. And now you think you never will be." "How can I be? I'm marked. I'm bound to serve." "You're at the beginning of a journey," Selene interrupted gently. "A difficult journey. One you didn't ask for and don't feel ready for, but a journey that might, if you let it, show you a kind of freedom you never imagined existed." The girl looked at her skeptically. "That sounds like something a priest would say, like propaganda to make me accept my fate." "It's not fate," Selene said. "It's possibility. And the difference between those two things is choice." She touched her own mark, glowing softly on her forehead. "This mark, it's not a chain. It's a compass. It doesn't trap you. It points you toward who you might become. But you still have to choose to walk in that direction. And that choice? That's the hardest and most important freedom you'll ever have." "I don't want to choose this." "Then don't. Not yet. Not until you're ready." Selene stood, extending a hand to help the girl up. But while you're figuring it out, let me teach you how to work with the mark instead of against it. How to channel its power without losing yourself. How to serve without giving up your identity. And how to find the freedom that exists not in the absence of ties, but in the presence of purpose. The girl looked at Selene's offered hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she took it. "My name is Kira," she said. "Selene," she replied with a smile. "Come on, let's get you something to eat. Then we'll talk about what your mark means and what you want to do about it. And I promise you this, no matter what you decide, I won't force you to serve. But I will show you what's possible, if you choose to." They walked out of the abandoned building together, into the golden light of late afternoon. Another compass pointing true. Another traveler learning that the longest journey was always the one from resentment to acceptance, from fighting to flowing, from running away to running toward. And another sunward in, being born not through force, but through choice, the freest choice of all. So what did you think of this journey? Selene learned that freedom isn't about escaping responsibilities. It's about choosing them with full understanding. The mark she thought was a prison became a compass, guiding her toward a life richer and more meaningful than the one she'd planned. If you enjoyed this story, leave your comment below telling me what resonated with you most. Was it Selene's struggle with her mark? The wisdom of the Wind Cheetah? The transformation from resentment to purpose? And don't forget to subscribe to the Solaris Legends channel to follow new adventures in this universe of desert, light, and destiny. With each episode, new legends emerge from the sands. Until the next story, Desert Traveler.